Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and joining me today is Devindra Hardwar. Devindra, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing well on this Saturday morning. We're recording early.
This extremely early Saturday. It's like 6:55 right now, and we are here because we wanted to get this episode done sometime before Thanksgiving week. And it's just me and you today. Jeff is out. He is super busy getting ready for the holiday with his family. So, do another podcast is what I hear.
Do another podcast, that traitor.
Yeah.
You can find Jeff somewhere else on the internet this week.
But we're here because, Devindra, we wanted to talk about a movie that came out relatively recently by a very talented writer-director, Taika Waititi. The movie is JoJo Rabbit. Here's a clip from the trailer. All right, that was from the trailer of JoJo Rabbit, the new film by Taika Waititi. I'm going to read the plot summary from IMDb, and this kind of reveals the plot as given away in the trailer. A young boy in Hitler's army finds out his mother is hiding a Jewish girl in their home. So that is the plot summary, and it is, you know what, Devindra?
Mm-hmm.
Let me do this all over again.
Sure.
I want to mention that we're going to do an After Dark as well. So for people who can tune in. So let's just start over. I'm sorry about that. Here we go. Just basically repeat everything you just said. Here we go.
Yep.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and joining me today is Devindra Hardwar. Devindra, how are you?
I'm doing well on this bright Saturday morning, actually, at this point. Yeah.
It's super early. It's like Saturday, 7 a.m. We're getting this out before the holiday. And it's just you and me today because Jeff is also getting ready for the holiday with his family and recording other podcasts, is what I understand. He's just
that traitor.
He's out on other shows.
Bastard.
So, very disappointing, but nonetheless, the Slash Filmcast must go on with me and Devindra here today to review JoJo Rabbit. I do also want to mention that because it's just me and Devindra, because we're just doing a movie review today, there is going to be an After Dark after the review. We'll try to put an approximate timestamp in there. But in the show notes, I should say. And so you check that out if you want to listen to the After Dark, which will contain spoilers for Ford v Ferrari. I will note them clearly when they happen. But yeah, if you're just not interested in JoJo Rabbit or haven't seen it yet, there will be an After Dark that you can check out later. You can find more episodes of the show at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Let's take a listen to the trailer for JoJo Rabbit. Much better. That was from the trailer for JoJo Rabbit, the new film by writer-director Taika Waititi, and it was based off of the book by Christine Lunens called Caging Skies. And I'm going to read the plot summary from IMDb. A young boy in Hitler's army finds out his mother is hiding a Jewish girl in their home. Now, this is a pretty interesting movie, Devindra, because it's a writer-director, coming off of the success of a Marvel film or a series of Marvel films. I feel like many of these directors that started out in small indie movies, they go off, they make these massive movies, and then they kind of make a really, really interesting smaller movie.
Basically a blank check movie, I guess.
A blank check movie, that's right.
Yeah, they can do whatever they want.
And I think that's great. We're starting to see the cultural impact of that already, right? So JoJo Rabbit's come out. Knives Out's coming out next week. Another movie by a director who used to make smaller movies, made a big movie, coming back to making smaller movies again. And I love it. I love that they have the clout now to kind of take these big chances with these movies that have like big stars in them, but that are movies that otherwise the studios aren't really making that often these days.
Yep.
And so it's very encouraging to see a movie like JoJo Rabbit, regardless of what you think of it. All that being said, what did you think of this movie, Devindra?
Oh, I completely loved it. I think I'm just a sucker for the way Taika Waititi handles kids and kids' emotional interiority. So think of Hunt for the Wilder People, which is an astounding movie, a movie I completely love. I don't think JoJo Rabbit is on that level, but this movie does a good job of kind of balancing this one kid's, a Hitler youth, basically, who's all in on Nazism and everything Hitler is selling, and kind of showing how it's something that's really geared towards a childish mentality. Like it's the propaganda. A lot of it is something that is really appealing to a kid, and the movie does a great job of balancing that tone, I think. And he has Hitler as like an imaginary friend in a really funny performance by Taika too. Tonally, like it's really fun and absurd and zany at the beginning, and then things get progressively darker and progressively, deeper. And I think it balances that well too. I think that was one of the complaints I've seen in some reviews about this film, where there are some big tonal shifts. Maybe Hunt for the Wilder People handled that better, and certainly when you're dealing with Nazi Germany, things get rough. Certainly, like in terms of how you're representing everything. But I completely love this movie. Like it is a kids in peril movie. It's a movie that had me kind of worried about what's happening to poor JoJo and his friends. The main actor, Roman Griffin Davis, is fantastic. He does a good job of like demonstrating just being a plucky kid, almost like somebody yanked out of a Wes Anderson movie. I'm thinking of like what was the one with the two kids who were in love?
Moonlight something, right?
Moonlight Kingdom.
Yeah,
like sort of like that. That's sort of like fantastical view of the world. Everything's so
Moonrise
simple.
Kingdom.
Moonrise Kingdom. Yeah. But that's sort of like simplistic view of the world. That's kind of like cute and twee at the same time. And then like you have Scarlett Johansson as his mother, who is sort of like just dealing with the fact that her son is this like crazy zealot, like a full believer in everything Hitler is selling. And I found that kind of interesting because she's somebody who doesn't quite agree with what's happening. And I really loved her performance because she was really portraying this mother who genuinely loves her son, but is also like worried for his soul. And I think she portrays that really well. There's a lot going on in her performance I really enjoyed. Yeah. So by the end of this movie, it definitely like hit me. It was quite a gut punch, and I really enjoyed it. It's funny, but will like leave you thinking and kind of gut punched at the end.
All right, so a few thoughts. I think that when I saw that Taika Waititi would be making a movie set in Germany during the Second World War, in which he would be playing a satirical version of Hitler, I got a little worried. I mean, I got excited, but also a little worried, because I think anytime you are setting this extremely dark time in human history in a humorous context, you are playing with fire. I mean, I think it is a challenging thing to get right. And if you do it incorrectly, you offend a lot of people, or you upset people, or you don't land your main point, or you're trying to be satirical, but you do it so badly that your piece of art actually ends up getting used as fuel for the opposing side. And all those dangers are present in this movie, and we can talk a little bit more about that in spoilers. But I'll say overall, like, so I was coming into this movie very apprehensive. I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't know if he's gonna get this right. Don't know if he's gonna nail this. And some of the reviews were overall very positive. I think it has like around 80 or 90% Rotten Tomatoes, but I was still nonetheless worried about the movie and not sure if it would land for me. And I have to say it did. I think that I really liked this movie. I thought that as you mentioned, like the central performances are really great. And when we think about how the topics of this movie are relevant for today, I mean, obviously we have evidence that there's white nationalists working in the White House today, and so that's like relevant in and of itself. But the thing that this reminded me of, honestly, is that like the thing I felt most acutely was this must be what it is like to have a child who believes in Gamergate. Like when you're living today.
Yes.
Is that
this
like
is like the incel argument too? Like it's all of that.
Yeah, I don't know about incel, but I think like that's I guess that's that is a
it's
piece
all
of this,
interrelated.
Right?
Like,
but it's
all
like
yeah.
But it's like I remember when the Gamergate thing happened, and reading like heartbroken messages from parents who their children had basically been indoctrinated through YouTube and social media, and that they believe like you don't understand, Mom. It's all about ethics in games journalism and things like that like I felt how powerless Scarlett Johansson's character felt. Like she couldn't even. You can't in that situation. You can't address the issue head on because
you can't argue it
because
really.
more often that will merely reinforce the indoctrination. You know what I mean? Because like part of the indoctrination is the belief that like not everyone is going to believe you, and those that don't are enemies, right? And so it's like a self-reinforcing system, and that's kind of what I was thinking about as I was watching Scarlett Johansson's character. You know, she plays Rosie, trying to talk some sense into her son, and she doesn't really spend that much of the time of the movie doing that. She just, I think she kind of is resigned to the idea that her son is a fanatic, and that the best she can do is try to love him and provide a good home for him, and hope that one day he will come around. Like hope that by seeing the values that she espouses and lives out in her life, that he will recognize the wrongness of his ways. I mean, whether or not that's a effective method in reality, I do not know. I don't know enough about deprogramming to understand whether or not that's effective. I will say the movie makes a good case for that being like the movie seems to believe that is like the best that character can do, and like it makes a convincing case for that. Now in reality that might be actually a bad idea, and you might need to take more drastic measures. I just don't know enough, unfortunately. But in the movie, I think it comes across as like, hey, this is actually like a pretty reasonable point of view for this mother to take, and she does the best she can. And we can talk later about whether she was successful or not. But like, I think that I was very touched by how hopeless the situation seems, and how the mother nonetheless is still hopeful in this really challenging circumstance, both at home and in her country.
Exactly. I think the early scenes with those two kind of brought a tear to my eye, just in terms of like how absolutely loving she was as a character and what she was trying to convey to him. Because you can't have the didactic argument about why specifically this whole entire philosophy he's grown up with is wrong, because this is everything this kid knows. But slowly but surely, she's trying to show him something different too.
I will say that one of the things that the movie does a fairly good job of, in my opinion, not a perfect job, but a fairly good job of, is making you understand why people would be taken in by this kind of propaganda. Because for this kid, JoJo, who's kind of like a lonely kid, not really what we would understand to be like an alpha male, like kind of a meek, timid child. And kind of an outcast, certainly becomes an outcast during the course of the movie. You can understand why something like Nazi propaganda would be extremely intoxicating to them. And it's because like this kind of propaganda, this kind of ideology preys on people who generally are otherwise like unfulfilled in some way. And I think that the movie like does a good job of like making you understand that, the movie is very much from his perspective, the child's perspective, and everything is whimsical and everything is fun, and that's the point of the movie. It's like we're showing you the internal battles that happen in a child's mind as personified through Joe Hitler, and we're also showing you why this child would find it to be an appealing thing to be in Hitler Youth, right? And and so, I think that's like theoretically a service the movie is doing, is letting you understand that like anyone can be taken in by this, and like that's why it's even more important to be vigilant against these kinds of ideologies, and to kind of think about what the root cause is, right? That it's
sure.
Like this kid is not necessarily dumb. But he does have problems that predispose him to believing in this stuff. And so, as kind of an illustration of the mindset of a child during this very tumultuous time in human history, I think it's very effective and very heartwarming, and at times very funny if you're willing to embrace the movie's tone, which not everyone is. And I'll just say briefly before we get into the spoilers that like, if you are not willing to embrace the tone, I completely understand that. I think that, Devindra, I had this there was a heated debate. I mean, I'll say that like as time has gone on and as social media has become more prevalent in our lives, it has been really exhausting to share opinions about movies in general because everyone has a take, and there's always like a lot of people who think you're wrong about anything. There's always some people who think you're right. There's always a lot of people who think you're wrong, and if you share your opinions, you can get really beat up on social media. And I think like one way I have felt this most acutely was in the depiction of Bruce Lee in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood this year. And there's many people, myself included, who really were not a fan of that depiction. And there are like I would say, thousands of people on social, millions of people in real life who disagreed with us and who thought we were wrong and being too sensitive. And oh, by the way, don't you understand? Don't you understand, by the way, that you were seeing it through Cliff Booth's perspective, and that's why Bruce Lee looks like an asshole in this movie? And that's just enormously frustrating to be on the receiving end of those kinds of reactions. And so, having gone through that myself this year, I think that if, let's say, as an example, your family was murdered by Hitler, right? Like if Hitler took actions that directly resulted in the slaughter of members of your family, I can understand why you'd be bothered that he is depicted in a very goofy fashion in this film.
Well, I don't know if that was a particular issue I've seen. It's more like there are other characters in this movie, like Sam Rockwell's character, who is a person of influence in the whole like Nazi hierarchy, but he's also depicted as somebody who there's more going on. Maybe a nice guy. I'm not sure what it is with him taking on a lot of these roles where he's like, like
a racist the nice guy, who may be a nice guy.
Yeah. But there's a lot of that going on. I think some of that may be more. You can certainly question that.
Whatever the case, I think all I'm saying is like, you may disagree with me, and that's fine. But like, I personally understand anyone's reaction to this film because it's such a polarizing series of events in history, like whatever. And if the idea of seeing Nazis portrayed in anything other than as dangerous war criminals upsets you, I completely understand that. That obviously it is not the writer or director's intention to upset you. Maybe it is. I don't know. I think that he's obviously trying to make a point about how children see these things, right? And that like he's trying to make these characters into objects of ridicule rather than like infantilize them or make them into things that aren't dangerous. So I feel like that's the purpose. But that being said, if that is not how you read the purpose, I understand. Just because like this is such a polarizing topic, subject, whatever, and it's such a fine needle to thread in terms of what Taika Waititi is doing, both in the script as well as his performance as Hitler, that I think people can disagree. Respectable people can have respectful differences about whether or not he actually threads that needle successfully.
I think it's also interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think he does, but I can understand if a lot of people don't think he does. So anyway.
It's also interesting. This movie's coming from a guy who is, he's of Maori descent, but also he has Jewish heritage. So this is a guy who's really coming from the, being part of the oppressed minority in New Zealand, basically, and also dealing with the legacy of having, a Jewish family as well. So his perspective, I think, is really fascinating here.
I mean, I think like in some ways, if I'm to be presumptuous, like this might be a way to like making art in general can be a good way to work out one's feelings about a specific topic.
Definitely.
And I don't know if that's what he was doing here, but it seems like very reasonable to conclude that that's something he was doing, is that like there is this like these atrocities that happened to his group of people in the past, and like by taking a satirical mallet to some of the people responsible, he can kind of help like understand what happened a little bit better. Help people understand what happened a little bit better. Anyway, go ahead.
It's also something that's been done by like Mel Brooks and a ton of other people, who have been doing this work for a very long time too. So this is part of a long legacy, I think, of satirizing uh, Nazis in general. I think some of the better criticisms I've seen is that this movie does imply that if a good person just kind of falls in with this Nazi philosophy, does that instantly make them terrible? And I don't know if the movie quite wrestles with that sort of baggage, but that did make me think of like what's happening here in America too. Certainly, like when the Muslim ban was being like discussed and implemented, it was terrifying to me it was terrifying to see airport workers just instantly be like, oh, okay, those are my orders. I guess I'm not going to let these people into the country. I'm not sure if those people woke up that morning deciding to be, to be instruments of a hateful, policy, but it's their job and they did it. And like, it's okay. What does that make them eventually too, right? Like that's a deeper discussion.
I mean, I think that when the producers came out, I actually never saw it, to be honest with you. But
it's good,
like,
yeah.
But I've heard it's good, and it's like the idea that Nazis would be a problem in our lifetime was so remote back then.
Mm-hmm.
And now there is a very reasonable case to be made that there's white nationalists plural working in the White House and influencing national policy. Like that is a fact, what I just said.
Yep.
And it makes the issues hit much closer to home, and therefore makes me for work like this specifically, which is intended to be humorous, you're intended to laugh at Hitler. It makes me much less kind of willing to tell someone, hey, don't you get that, like, this is the point? It's trying to make it funny. And it's like, I understand if people don't want to laugh at this right now, because it's not funny. It's actually pretty upsetting. And I understand, like, if there's like, this is not the time. Some people think it's not the time to release or enjoy a work of art like this. Mm-hmm. For me, I found it to be really, really effective and moving and very funny. And we've already talked about performances from people like Roman Griffin Davis. I thought Thomas Mackenzie, who plays Elsa, is great. Scarlett Johansson, actually excellent. Like, this is so one of my favorite performances of hers. And Archie Yates, who plays Yorkie, who's JoJo's friend, the cutest kid ever.
Basically the kid from Up in real life. Really.
Yeah, although an Aryan version of that, and also he's in the Hitler Youth. But this is what we're talking about. Like,
Alfie Allen in this movie, weirdly hilarious.
He's very funny. But this is what I'm talking about. Like the character of Yorkie is freaking adorable, but he's also a Hitler Youth. He's also literally fighting on the side of the Nazis, and I understand why like people would be upset at a movie that makes Hitler Youth out to be really cute. Like that's. But at the same time as like that could be upsetting. I mean the flip side of that is that the point I think of showing that is to say that like children have no idea what the hell they're doing. They have no. There's a reason why like many organizations like enlist in child soldiers is because like children don't fully have a grasp of like what's right and wrong and the consequences of their actions yet. Mm-hmm. And this movie tries to remind us of that in a humorous way through the character of Yorkie. Again, your mileage may vary as to how much you think that's an important message or how tastefully you think the movie does that. So.
It does make me wonder how much our capacity for satire exists now, because I don't know if it's hot take culture or what, like the way people will instantly judge a movie if they see a trailer or hear a pitch or something without actually seeing the thing.
Well, I think that's a little unfair. I think the point is that the problem is that there are many people who will take like if the satire is not done skillfully enough, there's people who will take the satire at face value.
I guess it just seems like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, would we be having the same discussions? Or is it, I guess maybe it's the availability of like social media and everybody being able to write and express their opinions where, you're hearing more dissent around particular depictions of a satire. I will say, I think if this movie had come out 10 years ago, I think it may have seemed a little more like, oh, this is funny, but we've seen the producers. We've seen all this before. What relevance does this have to life today? Right. Whereas looking at it as a movie in 2019, it is absolutely relevant. It is absolutely like telling us something about the world.
Yeah. I just think that many times stuff that people think is satire or stuff that self-professes to be satire does a poor job of conveying
Sure.
itself as satire.
Yeah.
I don't think this is one of those pieces of work, though. I think this is very
Yeah.
clearly a satire. Like
It goes to the extreme of giving you a clown Hitler imaginary friend, right? Like I think you know how you're supposed to take that, but
agreed. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree
it's
completely
tough.
with you. But
Yeah.
you know, I think a lot of satire out there is actually pretty bad.
I agree.
And I think that like or a lot of people say, hey, don't you understand it's supposed to be, don't you understand the Bruce Lee scene is supposed to be satire? Well, hey, if a lot of us didn't understand that, then I don't think you did a good job at conveying that. You know, like I'm not saying that in fact that was the case for that scene,
It's
but
also,
I think like,
not the best way to describe that scene.
right.
Sure.
But that's what I'm saying is like there's many people out there who like think that a work of art was intended one way, and the work of art didn't do a very good job of making itself clear that that's what it was intended, as evidenced by the fact that lots of people didn't assume it was satire. So, again, JoJo Rabbit, not one of those pieces of art. I thought it was really well done, well worth seeing, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in spoilers. But before we get to that, we got to thank our sponsor for the day, Pretty Litter. Devindra, tell us, now that we're done talking about the unpleasantness of Jojo Rabbit's geopolitical circumstances, tell us about Pretty Litter.
Listen, Nazis are bad, but what's also bad is dealing with my cat litter every day. Let me put it that way.
Those are not comparable things that are bad, but they are both bad things.
They are both bad things. They both smell like poop. I don't know. I love my cats. I have two cats. The best thing about cats during cold months is that they love to snuggle up to you and keep you warm. The worst part about cats is that you have to deal with litter. And in New York, that involves lugging 20-pound boxes or jars of litter from the store. It's not great. So I want to tell you guys about Pretty Litter. It's basically kitty litter 2.0. It's shipped to your door in a small, lightweight bag. It lasts an entire month, which I think is pretty cool. So no more having to deal with the store or anything like that. It has next level odor protection. So it uses crystals that trap and conceal odor and moisture. You just have to clean up the poop. You don't have to worry about like dealing with the pee until you like switch out the whole thing. The best part though is that Pretty Litter monitors your cat's health. So it can change colors to detect underlying illnesses and will tell you if urgent care is needed. Which is a big help. The cats aren't really good about telling you when they're sick. With my old litter, I would sometimes, if I saw blood, that's bad. But beyond that, you don't know what else is going on. So Pretty Litter kind of helps you with all of that, certainly for kidney issues. So do what I did. Make the switch to Pretty Litter today by visiting prettylitter.com and use promo code FILMCAST for 20% off your first order. That's prettylitter.com, promo code FILMCAST for 20% off. prettylitter.com, promo code FILMCAST.
Thanks to Pretty Litter for sponsoring us today. We also want to thank people who donated to this podcast this week. Thanks to Dean R. and Michael Friedson for your donations. Thanks also to Marty Phillips who writes in, quote, "You bring so much joy. Thanks." Thanks to Marnie from San Francisco for writing that message to us. If you want to support what we do here on the podcast, it's the holiday season. It's the time of giving. Go to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/filmcast. Or go to /film.com, click on the /filmcast tab, use the PayPal links on the side of the page. We never want you to donate if it in any way causes you hardship. But if you want to throw some cash our way, we'd really appreciate it. And if you want to support us for free, really easy way to do that is go to the Apple Podcast link for the /filmcast and just leave a star rating or a review for us. So thanks so much to everyone who has donated, and hope everyone has a happy holiday. Let's get to spoilers for JoJo Rabbit starting right now. So I think there is a Boom Goes the Dynamite to be had about Sam Rockwell and playing racists in prestige movies.
Several movies at this point too.
That like get a shot at redemption at the end of the movie. That seems to be his he's typecast that way now. So yeah, I can totally understand, because it's like, oh, don't you understand? There were like many good Nazis as well. Like that's kind of the implicit message of the Sam Rockwell character, right? And
Yeah.
I understand why that would bother people.
And somebody who's also like dealing with their own like identity struggles too. Like
right,
it's
like because
implied.
he's like it's
Yeah.
implied that he's homosexual, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to say about that character. He's kind of like he's pretty stereotypical kind of character in this kind
He,
I don't want to say
yeah.
this kind of movie because this kind of movie is pretty rare, but like
Yeah,
in
yeah.
a war movie, he's like a very stereotypical character.
Well,
of like,
he's interesting because he's bad at his job, right? So he's I think at first it's like, oh, he's somebody who's just failing upwards, right? He kind of exists in this thing and he doesn't really believe in the war, but he's going through with it. And then I think by the end you're supposed to get the idea like maybe, he helped them in the house. Maybe, he is just trying to do what he can to survive while not like helping the Nazis too much, which I guess that's a take. That's a better way to go than being, full on Nazi supporting, but he's certainly also benefiting from a certain amount of protection there with that identity.
Yeah, yeah. I have to say, I thought the jokes over, like I was much more. Let me redo that. I have to say that for me, the like emotional elements of the movie were far more consistent for me than the humor elements of the movie.
Sure.
I thought the humor was like pretty hit or miss overall. So for instance, there's a scene when like Stephen Merchant shows up as part of the Gestapo, and they do all the like Heil Hitler like 50 times, and I'm like, okay, I don't really think this is that funny.
That is a joke. That is the sort of like Christian Shaw as a horse type joke. It just keeps going.
It just keeps going. I'm like, it was barely funny the first time, and like the second or third time, I'm like, not really that funny.
Yeah.
But then he goes through the book, like that the kid has written about why he doesn't like Jews, and him reading through like everything bad that happens to Nathan. I thought that was just hilarious. Like, just a funny. The penny farthing bicycle element was really funny. So. That scene kind of really encapsulated, the great elements of the humor and kind of the weaker elements for me. Some of it really hit well, some of it didn't hit well.
But also that scene pivots completely into like a terror.
Oh,
into,
yeah.
like a very scary thing. I think
Super
that
suspenseful scene. Yeah.
That is the sort of like tonal shift that I really enjoy in this movie, where the girl whose name I forget right now, Elsa, she is pretending to be his sister, and clearly that seemed like a big gamble, honestly, because maybe people locally would know that his sister isn't around anymore. So that it's lucky enough for her that paid off. But that was a great scene, great use of tension, but also great use of Sam Rockwell's character too. I don't know what else to say about the greater depths of that character at this point. There is one particular scene though that it hit me for a wallop completely, and that is when he's outside, he sees a butterfly, and he walks up to his mother's shoes, which I kind of knew that was coming. I didn't know how the movie would portray it, and between Roman Griffin Davis's performance and the sort of like subtlety of how they did that, that made me tear up quite a bit. It's really emotional.
I thought it was great because there are multiple close-ups on her shoes throughout the film, and they do the shoe tying thing as well, and so they really set it up well. Although the thing that I couldn't get out of my head was, it's very artful, Devindra, and I think it's very purposeful, and I don't think they should have done the scene a different way. But when I watched it, the kind of aspiring filmmaker part of me thought, this is a way to shoot the scene so that Scarlett Johansson doesn't need to show up that day. I know that's probably not what was intended.
That's a little. That shows how broken you've become, Dave. Like where you see the process, you're like, oh, she didn't have
because I think it's notable that they don't show her face, but then I'm thinking to myself, well, would it really be more effective to show the bloated corpse of Scarlett Johansson's body? Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Not really.
I think they did it in a very artful way. You're right.
And you get a wide shot too, and I think the upfront of him seeing the confrontation, like seeing him be aware of what's happening, him holding her dangling legs and just crying, and then the wide shot is him completely alone in that town square. And I was worried that people were going to be like, oh, you're crying over your Nazi hating mother now you're in trouble. But I'm glad the movie didn't even go that. Like, it just gave us the moment for him to kind of grieve for her, and then cuts to him just like staring at her, like sitting there and just staring and dealing with that. And that kind of hit me, of this poor kid being completely left alone in the world and having to fend for himself.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question, Devindra. You know, sometimes on Twitter, this thing can happen where like you make a tweet and then people have like this entire conversation in response to that tweet, but you're still tagged into the tweet, so you see all the replies.
Thank goodness for the mute conversation. Yeah.
But that happened to me recently with JoJo Rabbit, and I tweeted about JoJo Rabbit, and here's what I said about JoJo Rabbit. I said, hard to talk about this one, as I think anyone is well within their rights to dislike any depictions of Nazis that make them seem anything but dangerous war criminals, but I nonetheless found this movie very moving and beautiful and funny. And two listeners or followers, Maddie To Go and Dan Gvozden from Sup Spider Talk, a former guest of the show, friend of the show, basically had this huge conversation about the movie, like in my mentions, which is just like, you know, guys, you can remove me from the mentions, okay? I mean, like it's good. Like Dan, I consider Dan a friend at this point, so it's not a big deal. But it's just like sometimes people just keep going. And it's like they're like having like personal revelations, you know. They're like having life-changing, life-altering epiphanies, you know. And I've already
Twitter's interface, honestly, because it is hard to see sometimes that
there other people are tagged in,
who's tagged and how to remove them. Yeah,
they're like, you know, having like a life-changing come to Jesus moments in my mentions. I've already moved on from the topic like 6 months ago. You know what I mean? But this is the magic of Twitter. Anyway, Dan made some good points about this movie that I wanted to read. So I guess it's not a bad thing that he still tagged me into this. He says, quote, I found the psychology damaging in how limiting it is. We see none of the propaganda that led to the child's indoctrination, nor do we have any idea of how his mind changes throughout, other than through the death of his mother, who seemed to give up on him. The Nazis are reduced to cartoonish oversimplifications, which I think fights against the Nazis are people too message that you experienced. I'd kill for a film that showed how propaganda can influence the minds of children and how they can be deprogrammed, etc. I guess my thought is if you're going to use Nazis as the target of your ridicule, you don't have to pull your punches. They are Nazis, the evil we compare everything against. They can still be human, but let's lean in. I have a brother-in-law who is a brainwashed fascist, like the boy in this film. I guess I was hoping to experience a film that I thought would brutally showcase the hypocrisy of nationalism, etc., but I felt like this played too safe in a sort of unreality, end quote. And I can understand some elements of what Dan is saying there. I think that, as I mentioned multiple times at this point, the movie, even when it has the chance, like, on some level, the Nazis in this movie are cartoonishly evil, but then there's also like the Sam Rockwell character, you know, who, hey, I guess he is kind of a human after all. You know what I mean? And also, the movie doesn't really get into what is required for deprogramming. You know, that's another thing that like I can see people objecting to is basically what the movie, like the message of the movie, one could interpret is that all it takes is the love of a good woman to like be deprogrammed. Just like in like A Beautiful Mind, it's like all it takes is the love of a good woman to combat
certainly
schizophrenia.
The most simplistic way to view that, yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, I can understand why like deprogramming is like very challenging and very complex, and you know the movie makes this extremely serious problem out to be like relatively simplistic. So I understand why that can bother some people.
But the movie, like the whole point of the movie shows, I think from the very beginning, when he doesn't wring that rabbit's neck at the behest of his older, you know, Nazi Hitler youth, it shows that this kid is thinking a little differently, right? He thinks he's on board, but he's basically just playing with toys at this point. Like he's not fully invested as maybe even he thinks he is. So it's tough. Like
you're right. I think what you're saying is he's not fully brainwashed, or because he's young and malleable, he's not fully brainwashed, right?
Yeah.
So
he's not the kid. Like we've seen movies about like really terrible fascist kids. I'm thinking of like Portrait of a Leader, which is a movie I'm sure you'll hate, Dave, if you'll or Childhood of a Leader, because it's by the guy who did that Natalie Portman movie that you also hated. The one where she's a pop star. Yeah. It is just as like abrasive, and it's about like this terrible kid, and like could he, what is he going to grow up to be? This movie presents JoJo, I think, as a sweeter kid who may just be going along with all this because like it's what he's doing to like try to fit in. I don't know.
But at the same time, like the flip side of that is like it does remove some teeth from the satire, right?
I don't.
Is like imagine if it was like a like extremely hateful, spiteful child, like that was who the main character was. That like actually brings out the actual danger that these people pose to society, right? And
that's a very different movie.
It's a very different movie. It's a very different movie, right? So it's complicated. You could have made this movie in a number of different ways. I liked the version of this movie that came out, but as I have taken great pains to say, I understand why people didn't like it, or why they feel like it doesn't go far enough with the satire, or why it doesn't go far in its critique. I think those are all like pretty legitimate criticisms. All that said, I did find the relationship between JoJo and Elsa to be very touching, and it like felt like it developed in a very realistic way. Like I could see why this kid would have this huge crush on this girl, and why like that would not be reciprocated, because like that would have been extremely weird if that had happened. You know what I mean? So I thought it all like played out delightfully and in very plausibly and very touching. And I think the ending is a joy. You know, like when they finally get to the end and they've triumphed over this horrifying situation.
And it's not like happily ever after either, right?
Yeah,
she's lost her family and her fiance. He's lost his mother. They're both like alone together in this future, but at least there's hope.
Yeah, there's hope. They have each other, or they have at least this time they spent together, and I was quite touched by it. Anything else you want to mention? I'll just say like one of the things that like I was most was the most adorable things was when Yorkie tried to give JoJo a hug while he was in the robot suit.
Yeah,
I just thought that was so cute. And he does it. He just
and Yorkie in his paper uniform too. It's like every time you see him, it's like more and more deteriorated because they can't afford real uniforms, I guess. Yeah,
everything that Yorkie does in this movie is gold.
Love Yorkie.
I mean, he says like, you know, everyone's mad at us, everyone's attacking us. The only people who are on our side are Japanese, and just between you and me, they don't look super Aryan.
Yeah,
which I just thought was amazing, an amazing line. So, also the Scarlett Johansson scene where she plays both JoJo's mother and father is just a brilliant piece of acting, but B, also a great way of conveying like what kind of childhood JoJo had before we saw him,
without being like an exposition dump or something.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's just a really kind of brilliant piece of screenwriting, I thought, and brilliant execution as well. So overall, I really like this movie, Devindra. I think it's going to be in my top 10 is my guess. Although my top 10 currently doesn't have 10 movies right now. But
it's pretty easy to get in there.
It's pretty easy right now. You just need to be a movie I didn't actively dislike. But I think it's great, and I'd recommend it if you are ready for the emotional wallop that it packs. So, so shall we wrap it up there? Get to the after.
Sure.
Those are our thoughts on JoJo Rabbit. You can find more episodes at /filmcast.com. Email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. And this episode was edited by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Devindra, where can people find more of your work on the internets?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Devindra. I write about tech at Engadget.com, and I'm also doing the Engadget podcast there. Just look that up on the site.
Check out my stuff at culturallyrelevantshow.com. It's my new podcast where I interview filmmakers, authors, and other artists. This week I have an interview with Nathan Johnson, the composer for Rian Johnson's new movie, Knives Out. So check that out.
Nice.
In the meantime, next week we will be reviewing Knives Out. Monday or Tuesday after we get back from break, December 3rd or 4th, around thereabouts, we'll have a review of Knives Out, the new Rian Johnson movie. So look forward to that as well. And that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving. Spend some time with your family. Give thanks for everything you have. And thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week. All right. Before we get to Ford v Ferrari, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Let me just think here. What do you think of the Cybertruck, Dave?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Talk about it. So, Devindra, we had a chance to see Tesla unveil the new Cybertruck this week.
Uh-huh.
You are a technology writer at Engadget.com.
Yep.
Uh, I guess I'm curious. Like, apparently people were expecting this, right? Like they had made an announcement. They had made an announcement that they were having some event. I didn't know. I barely keep track of this stuff on the periphery.
He's been teasing the cyber truck, like an electric truck, for a while now. Yeah.
So, were you excited? Like, are you a big Tesla fan? Like, what's your attitude toward Tesla at this point?
I mean, I think they've done a lot of cool things. Tesla, the best part of Tesla is that they've really pushed the entire car industry to really take electric seriously. So I don't think Elon Musk is a particularly like genius or a visionary guy, but he's made some big bets. Tesla for a while almost crumbled because like he was betting everything on it, and it's kind of like luck and like a certain amount of like happenstance that the other parts of the car industry just didn't really do electrics, so they're able to survive. And I think he's done some major things. As a CEO, I think he's kind of a mess. He is basically like Trump-esque in his ability to potentially destroy that company with a tweet. Is kind of a volatile character. So yeah, I have a lot of complicated feelings about Tesla. I wouldn't mind owning a Tesla eventually, ideally when Musk is not around. But I'm interested in what they're doing, and they do tend to push this industry forward. This thing is one of the most hideous vehicles I've ever seen in my life. It is the equivalent of the Homer from The Simpsons, like this garish monstrosity of design that has maybe all the features you think you'd want, but maybe not put together in the way you'd expect. It's disgusting. Like it's absolutely infuriating. It looks like
didn't they play like a Mad Max Fury Road score when it rolled onto stage, if I recall correctly?
I didn't see that full thing, but maybe, sure. I'm not surprised. Like clearly this is the product of somebody who grew up on like, science fiction and like 80s cyberpunk stories and things like that. It looks it looks like the Warthog from Halo, except not as cool. It looks like something you'd find in the 1990s Judge Dredd movie, or not Judge Dredd, the 1990s
I was going to say Deep Cut, the Sylvester Stallone.
Sort of like the Sylvester Stallone.
And you'd find this rolling around in a mega city.
In a mega city, like something like that. Yeah. It's not great. It's really ugly. Especially for like a company who's producing like really nice angular, like really nice curvy cars with cool designs. This is just going way out there. I think feature-wise it's really interesting, but this is not the future I want. I don't want to see this thing on the streets. And to me, it's
I think
emblematic.
If you saw it on the street, you would judge that person.
It's sort of like when you see a Hummer, you're like, oh, this person doesn't give a fuck about the planet. Like this person doesn't care. If I saw this on the street, I'd also think like this. Yeah, I would not think too highly of anybody using this. It also doesn't seem like. Yeah.
Here's my thing. I'm a very like live and let live when it comes to cars thing, but the thing that really I would be bothered by is like it just looks extremely impractical, like because it's so large. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just, and I live in a city right now where I need to. I live in a city right now where I end up parking in parking garages a lot, and like in high density buildings, and there's the space between the parking stripes is not very large, right? Yeah. And so like you'd essentially have to take up two spaces.
This is not a good vehicle for cities, basically. Like it looks like it's the size of a full size pickup, which is what they're trying to be, but it also looks like a military vehicle, like in terms of the way it's designed and those giant wheels and everything.
Yeah,
so,
it looks like something from Mad Max Fury Road, RoboCop 1.
RoboCop 1.
Total Recall. Yeah. Like it
Demolition Man. That's what I was thinking. Demolition Man car. Yeah.
Yeah. So my attitude towards this car and this event can be best summarized by this article that Ryan Mack wrote over at BuzzFeed. I don't know if you saw this, but the headline of the article is, "I can't stop watching this video of Elon Musk breaking his Cybertruck windows." And he says here, the unveil seemed to be going to plan until Musk and his chief designer decided for kicks that they'd throw a metal ball at the car's driver's side window, and holy hell, it was not worth it, according to a video I've watched approximately 37 times. I mean, it's like a scene out of Silicon Valley, where he's like, hey, this glass is bulletproof, it can withstand anything, and then they throw a metal ball in it and it cracks, right?
Well, it didn't shatter.
It did.
Okay,
well,
so
it didn't. The ball did not go through, right? So that's to its credit, and that's actually probably better than most car windows. So fair is fair. Like, it is better than a normal car, but you know that they did not intend for that to happen like that. And this is the thing. This is the thing that happens so often, Devendra, that like, it doesn't drive me like it. I'll say at this point, it's mildly irritating when it happens. Right, is when something like this happens, which I think, like by any conventional metric, is a massive PR fail. By any conventional metric, is a massive PR fail. Right, where they get up on stage, they're like, "Hey, this glass will not break. This glass will not break. This glass will not break. Let's heave a metal ball at it. The glass breaks. Then the car needs to sit on stage."
Yep.
For another 15 minutes while the presentation completes, and in the background they project things that they threw at the car windows that were able to successfully withstand the force, or at the car.
And they did dump a large object on the windshield before this too, and it seemed fine. So,
but that's the staging of the thing. Like, the staging of the thing was, hey, we need to keep the car on stage the entire time. We cannot roll it off the stage, even though it is unsightly because it has these two huge, massive blemishes on the windshield. Okay, so it looks terrible. It looks completely unintentional. And then every single time some of this happens, something like this happens, every single time, there's always a huge contingent, often of people in my mentions, that will say something like, "Oh, I bet he did it intentionally." You know, I bet they did it intentionally because look, we're all talking about it now. We're all talking about it. They must have done it on purpose. And let me just tell you, it's 99.999% of the time, it's not on purpose. 99% of the time, you think to yourself, "Oh, this corporation must have done this extremely stupid thing on purpose." It's not on purpose. And I don't know what else I can say about that, but like you just have to trust me that is the truth.
People can be very stupid. Corporations can be very stupid. These things happen.
I mean, Devendra, do you think it's on purpose? Do you think it's on purpose, Devendra?
No. It's completely not. Like, this is a major product. This is their first car thing they've been doing, and they have a major competitor in Rivian who showed off this really cool looking electric pickup truck.
Did Rivian's vehicle have shattered windows?
I don't think they talked about it. I don't know why something like this would need bulletproof windows. Like, did it need that? Did it need to be covered in stainless steel, which is not light? There's a reason cars have this plastic, not plastic, but like polycarbonate type thing. Cars are meant to be a little flexible, so there's a lot about this thing that just seems completely insane. The pickup bed is also way too high for people to use it the way people would normally use pickups. So anyway, it's a lot of stuff. I wish Jeff was here because Jeff is fully on board with this monstrosity. I really want to talk to him about it.
All right,
so we'll just make fun of it
that next time. We'll do that next time Jeff is on. But the actual presentation itself of Tesla, like throwing this metal ball and the thing, it is just an exquisite. It's like watching David Brent do that dance he does in the original Office. Like that dance. It's like so painful to look at, and yet you cannot look away. So I mean, this is a movie podcast, but that is like one of the most exquisitely painful things I've watched in the last week. Yeah. And therefore, that's why we're talking about it here on the Filmcast After Dark. Speaking of painful things I watched, we got a bunch of emails in. Well, actually, I'll do one email before we get to our Ford v Ferrari stuff. We got this email from somebody who signed their email "pissed off longtime listener," and he writes, and I'm just going to say we're going to give away some minor details about Mandalorian. I don't consider these really to be spoilers, but you may, so skip forward if you do. This person wrote in, "Guys, what the hell? Not everyone in the world has access to Disney Plus yet, and now on your show, you of all people spoil The Mandalorian. Disgraceful. Devendra spoils it by revealing a small Yoda character is featured, and Jeff talks about a character being cut in half. That's when I stopped and deleted your podcast in disgust." To which I responded, that I say multiple times, we are going to spoil The Mandalorian before any of that happens. And then this person wrote back in, I'm going to keep them nameless out of courtesy. He says, "Thank you for taking the time to reply, David. My apologies, my bad. I skipped through the advertising and missed your warning. Sorry once again." End quote. So, I think this is a great object lesson in why you should never skip the ads.
Or skip the ads wisely. Wait till the tail end of it. Yeah.
This is the thing that people want. This is what must have happened. Is this person must have skipped the ads, blown straight past the spoiler warning, right? And then just kept listening. Like for me, I have, I don't want to say OCD because I think it's, I think people actually suffer from OCD, but I have I'm very fastidious. Let's use fastidious. And when I skip, if and when I skip ahead of ads, which, I will not say I do regularly, but if and when I skip, I always rewind it to the portion right before the ad ends. Because it's why would I miss some of that sweet, sweet content?
It's like when you recorded a TV show off the TV on VHS or something, right? Yeah. That was a constant fight of going past the ad and getting right back to where the show was.
Why would you skip the actual content itself? So I guess the takeaway here is don't skip the ads, okay? Because basically the ads help us to keep doing this show. They're a really important part of helping us to keep doing the show. And B, if you do skip the ads, don't skip the actual content.
You'll pay for it.
You'll pay for it as this listener did.
And also, I think the only way to pay back this absolute slander on our character and our podcasting capabilities is a massive donation. That's all I can think of at this point.
Not really, but fair enough. Anyway, I thought that was a pretty hilarious. This person comes at me. This is the thing. This actually is a very curious phenomenon.
It comes
that happens
in swinging. Yeah,
this is a very curious phenomenon that happens very often on Twitter and email as well. Is somebody's gonna come straight at you with come out swinging, and I effing hate this freaking thing, and how dare you freaking make this thing, and then you respond to them. And then they're like, oh my gosh! So I didn't expect you to respond. Big fan,
Yes.
If you, particularly for celebrities, if you look at any time a celebrity responds to someone on Twitter, responds to criticism on Twitter, the person who made the initial tweet is always shocked that they got a response. And I'll say that's been me sometimes. I'll have tweeted something, and somehow I'll never tag the person. If I'm criticizing them in some way, and then they'll respond and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Actually, big fan. Didn't think you'd actually see that." Now, of course, this is different because they actually emailed straight to us. Yeah. But it is a phenomenon that
to see it.
You want somebody to see it, but not necessarily the person you're talking about, right? So.
It's sort of like, I'm also thinking of a Simpsons reference now, which I was thinking of the really tall guy in the small car. I was thinking of that during the Cybertruck reveal. But it's sort of like people shout at us a lot, for the show, for things I produce online. People love to shout, "Ha ha!" But when you get out, you step out of the car and you confront them. Think, does it find you funny? Well, as I drive my automobile, this is the largest car I can afford. As you confront the realities of the situation, it doesn't seem as funny to them. So that is my favorite phenomenon. I get a lot of flack for that from Adding Gadget too, because I write about Microsoft and I write about Apple. I just wrote about my first very, very positive MacBook Pro review in a very long time. And now I'm being called an Apple shill, even though I vastly prefer PCs. So, okay, sure.
Yeah. So I think people will always be hating. And also, if you're writing criticism, write it as though the person is going to the person who you're directing it to is going to read it.
A human being is going to read it.
Human being is going to read it. Keep that in mind. Okay. So, Devindra, last week we spoke about Ford v. Ferrari, and I had not very nice things to say about it, and we got a lot of response, a lot of tweets, a lot of emails about it. And I wanted to address some of them because I think some of them are really good. So let's talk first of all about I'll say we're probably going to spoil Ford v Ferrari during this next talk. So if you don't want to be spoiled on Ford v Ferrari, this thing that happened 30 years ago in real life, then tune out for the rest of the podcast. So we got an email from Jared Oliver, who wrote in to share about some of the techniques that were used, and he links to this article from premiumbeat.com, which actually is one of my favorite not only is it a great like stock music website, but they also do articles about filmmaking. And they have really good SEO. They rank really high on articles on filmmaking, so they often show up in my Google results. And there's an article entitled Making Ford v Ferrari Cinematography at 100 miles per hour. And they show how they use these things called process trailers, hostess trays, and specialty vehicles to shoot vehicles going as fast as they do in Ford v Ferrari. As I mentioned last week, one of the great things about Ford v Ferrari is that it is able to film these vehicles, these race cars, seemingly going as fast as they do in real life. And in general, that is very, very difficult to do because those vehicles are specifically designed to go that quickly. Like they're very low profile, they're very light, and so they're specifically designed so that they can go that quickly. And generally, a vehicle that can hold a camera does not go that quickly, right? And so they were able to use a combination of methods, and I assume some CG as well, but a lot of practical methods to shoot the racing scenes. And again, they use these things. It's basically like race cars, like basically like a cart that has a camera built into it with a race car on top of it. Is one of the ways they use to shoot it.
Right.
And we'll link to it in the show notes, but you can check it out. But thanks to Jared for sharing that with us. This email comes from Hank to /filmcast@gmail.com. Hank writes in, really enjoyed the podcast. Listening to the episode has been really frustrating. Opinions are clearly subjective, and I don't think this film is a masterpiece of cinema. However, there are some inaccurate assertions that frustrated me. Number one, the driver team size for Ford for the 24-hour of Le Mans during the film setting is 2 people, not 4 drivers. I don't know if what we said.
You said multiple drivers. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So sorry if I
don't know if we didn't specifically say 2, but it did sound like I think the movie didn't make it super clear either.
The movie did not do a good job of making clear what it was. Yeah. Okay. So then he says here, quote, the plot does not care about the second driver on Miles' team at all, but he is cast, he appears on screen multiple times, he is named, and he has lines. It blows my mind that someone would ever watch this movie and wonder, did they even cast the other driver? Oh, that was something that Jeff said on last week's episode. Additionally, I think there is definitely a naming failure. The film is called Le Mans 66 outside of the U.S. I assume this was done due to Ford's name recognition in the U.S. This is a naming failure because it's not a classic sports underdog movie a la Bad News Bears, but the opposing sides in the name sets up unfulfilled expectations.
By the way, in the UK, it's also, I think, illegal to have company titles, like company names and titles. So that's partially why.
It's about working as an artist/creative within the confines of a bureaucratic monolith. I also don't think it showcases American exceptionalism. I think American corporatism is shown to be massively evil, passively evil. It's a movie about individual accomplishment under systematic duress. The most exceptional character in the movie is English. The Englishman is even referred to as a superhero type in the podcast. He uses American money to succeed despite the American corporation trying to squash him. Part of me hates defending the film. I think it could have been a lot better and largely wastes the performances of Damon and Bale, but I think it does a disservice to movie fans to make inaccurate statements, and I think it needs to be discussed as it is instead of what one wanted it to be or what one thought it might be before viewing it. End quote. So that comes in from Hank. Thanks to Hank for the email. And yeah, first of all, let me just say, unequivocally agree. Like if we ever get anything factually wrong, that really bothers me a lot. And in general, people do let us know, and we do try to correct it on the podcast because I want this to be a podcast of accuracy. So like, thank you for holding us to that standard. Now, Devindra, I've had a lot of time to think about our conversation last week about Ford v Ferrari, and I stand by 95% of it. Like most of it, I still 100% stand by, 100% agree with. But the one thing that I do think I got wrong was like framing the Ford, like my framing of Ford as kind of like the underdog winner. Now, I will say, like, I agree with you in retrospect, looking back on it, like that you're right that this is like this movie is primarily about artistry succeeding under a punishing bureaucratic and corporate environment, right? Like I think when I think back on the movie, like that is the message that comes across, and it all is summed up in one moment that I don't think we talked about in last week's episode. It's summed up in the moment where, at the end of the movie, after Ken Miles has had the victory stripped from him unceremoniously, he kind of has a face-to-face meeting with the head of Ferrari, and like the head of Ferrari like doffs his cap to Ken Miles.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, they're still very apart, but it is like the way they're framed. It looks like they're right together.
Yeah, like he's in a balcony or something.
Yeah.
Like, he's like separate. He has a physical barrier that's separating him or something. But he kind of doffs his cap to him, and the point of that scene is game recognize game. The point of that scene is I, the other artist, recognize that you too are the artist.
Yeah.
And you have triumphed in a very challenging situation, right? That is ultimately the point of that scene, and one could argue the movie.
Yeah, and also the pursuit of artistry coming at the expense of everything else. By the way, because Ferrari pretty much bankrupt at the beginning of this movie, right?
Ken
Bale's
Miles
character,
lost his life.
Ken Miles lost his life, but even before that, like he's not doing so well. He's his garage, well, he's probably not the best customer service, person either. But these guys are so singularly focused on what they're doing, it kind of hurts everything else around them.
Yeah. Now, here's what I'll say in my defense. So I think like if this movie had been called Le Mans 64 in the U.S., I might have had a much different.
What
attitude.
does a title? I don't.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Let me just finish what I'm saying, okay?
Yeah.
Which is that I think that I would argue the cinematic language of the film positions Ford as the party to root for. For the most part, like Josh Lucas is kind of this slimy, disgusting character, and obviously. No one likes that character, and I think it's very clear he's supposed to be a bad guy.
Sure, but also Tracy Letts, his introductory scene is Tracy Letts berating the laborers working under him while he's standing on a platform like a king or something, and forcing them to walk home.
Okay, but fair enough. But then there's that moment when Lee Iacocca goes back, but like Lee Iacocca, a character whose arc is like a complete non-entity in my opinion.
Non-entity, but I do enjoy seeing John Bernthal in fancy suits.
He's awesome, although like he's like literally like bursting out of his shirt. Like
it's
he's
great.
so jacked. It's like that character is not a marketer for.
And he also disappears from the movie after like 30 minutes or something.
So like complete waste of a character in my opinion. But Lee Iacocca goes back to Ford and he's like, "Hey, by the way, he said you're fat and you make ugly cars and da 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 da." And then Tracy Letts sits behind the desk and he's like, "We're going to bury Ferrari at Le Mans."
But no, the thing, like he says all that.
Let me just finish. He is framed triumphantly. Like the camera is like literally like kind of at his level on the desk. We're gonna bury Le Mans, and I think like you as the audience in that moment. You're supposed to be like, yeah, we're going to bury those effing foreigners, right? Like, that's what the movie is evoking.
No.
Like, how dare they encroach on our territory?
I'm trying to interrupt you by
go ahead.
Asserting facts in that scene, Dave, once again. It wasn't, like, he takes all that. He's absorbing, like, all these criticisms. He says, oh, you're sons of whores, yada, yada, yada. And then he says, you'll never be Henry Ford. You are Henry Ford II. And then he has a look. And then the framing changes. And then it's like, we will crush Ferrari. And I don't think that's necessarily triumphant. I think that is in some ways hilariously petty. Like it shows like he'll take all the other criticisms, but like that defines the scene, Dave.
Well, let me just say, I agree. It's hilariously petty. That's my whole point.
But that is how the scene is not triumphant. It's not. It's more like this. Look at this rich, Joker, basically.
Okay. I disagree. Like this is what I'm saying is like, I think that ultimately you're right that Ford is the bad guy, but I do think that like up throughout most of the movie, Tracy Letts' character is framed as like you are meant to root for that character. And
there's and
they're like I don't know, dude.
There's nothing.
I feel my feeling. I'm just saying my feeling sitting in the audience when Tracy Letts' character let loose with that like jingoistic petty thing is that like we're supposed to root for him, and I personally found that to be laughable. And I don't think we're supposed to. Like I agree with you. I don't think we should root for him. But I think that that's what the movie conveys that we should do through the way that scene is shot.
I don't know, because as we were having this conversation, as you were counting the scene, you cut out the bit that defines the sort of like cynical statement the movie is making.
But even that, I don't agree that that's meant to be. It's like, hey, this person is saying I cannot surpass my predecessors, my ancestors. Like it is part of the American way to do better than your parents and your grandparents. And I think that this movie is, if about nothing else, the American way of certainly corporate moneyed interests surpassing, or threatening to destroy art, but also of like, hey, we try at things and we beat other people at their own game. And I feel like that is like part of what makes America in some ways great, in some ways not great. And so you're saying like, oh, well, I skipped the key part. And it's like, well, the key part, in my opinion, does nothing to take away from my point.
Yeah, if you ignore it,
No,
well,
I'm saying even if you don't ignore it, first of all, I literally wasn't
Yeah.
trying to ignore it. I was trying to.
I know. I was trying to help your point by mentioning that.
I was trying to summarize the scene. I apologize if I missed that crucial moment. But in my opinion, that does nothing to detract from my point, which is that I think that it's positioning him as like, hey, yes, like we as the audience are like, yeah, Tracy, let's like show him who's boss. Show him you can be better than your
Dave,
parents.
It's sort of like accepting a joke. Like you're trying to basically see the results of a joke by losing the punchline, right? Like is a joke still funny if you miss the key bit that triggers the actual reaction in the character?
Again, I'm saying I did not miss the key bit when I watched the movie. I just, in the summary that I gave you just now, I was just trying to provide a quick summary. And now that you point out the part that I missed and didn't say, I'm saying I remember that part. I don't think it takes away from my point.
To you. Like it's still
No, I didn't say it's not important to me. It is important to me. It further reinforces my point. So anyway, I think we obviously are.
And also, you forget the opening scene that I mentioned, which is literally him just berating his employees for not making cars fast enough. Like they have control over like there's a lot of him swinging his corporate might around, him abusing his employees. Basically, there's nothing sympathetic about that character until the scene where he breaks down in the car and he has a full understanding of it. Like this is the most like I don't know, evil Tracy Letts role I've seen in a very long time, because we're used to him being basically like the comforting dad in Lady Bird or something, right? Yeah,
he's kind of an asshole in Divorce.
He's kind of an asshole there. Sure. But I'm saying throughout this entire movie, like he is, after he decides to crush Ferrari, like it's him like being a curmudgeon. It's him being the out of touch CEO who doesn't understand like why they're losing. And it took Lee Iacocca to kind of demonstrate like people don't find the sexy, and he is just like Ford is out of touch. That's it. And like maybe through the Dane of his his power, he allows somebody to try and like run with an idea. I don't know how much of like that is an accomplishment. That just seems like the bare minimum he could do to kind of help his company survive. But anything else? Because I'm sure we've got I saw a lot of responses to what you guys thought of this movie as a process movie. And yeah.
I mean, okay. Well, how would you characterize those responses, Devindra?
I feel like I'm sitting pretty here with a lot of people just kind of going with what I was saying, because here's the thing. I think you guys, I don't know what it is, but I feel like the Ford v Ferrari title, certainly, okay, a title of a movie will frame how you view that movie, and I get that, but I don't know about limiting the movie to like wanting it to be just about that, or only viewing it through that lens, when I think the movie's a lot more.
I think you are mischaracterizing our problems with the movie. I think that my problems with the film go far beyond the title. That was one component of many things that we brought up, and I think that as I said, I stand by most of what I was trying to concede one small part, although you weren't allowing me to do that very gracefully. But I think that like one of the things that I think is like when I think back on what I thought about the movie, like one of the things I still think is a problem is it kind of suffers from what I call like biopic-itis, which is like you're like reading Wikipedia summary of the events that led up to this main event of Le Mans 64, and it's like you're watching a guy's life, but you're fast forwarding to only like the interesting bits. You're not given any context for why those bits are interesting, or any dramatic tension or build up. Like those are like far bigger of a problem to me than like what the title of the movie is and like who you're supposed to root for. I think that like the best thing that like heist movies do, right? I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast last week, but like the best thing that heist movies do is they spend like 45 minutes on exposition of why it's important that we do this heist, why, what are the rules of the heist, what are the things we're trying to overcome. This movie does some of that, as you point out, right? Like the brake stuff. I think that is actually like that's the one thing that pays off.
They literally go over the whole Le Mans track in diorama fashion in a scene that is both explaining how the race works, the process of the race, and also bonding Christian Bale's character and his son. So there's a lot of that. Like,
well, I'll say that one thing that I didn't. Like, first of all, I still think that it does a pretty poor job of explaining like what is actually involved in racing in Le Mans. But one thing that the movie does well is convey like the visceral exhaustion of what it is like to do that race. And particularly in the first scene when you see Matt Damon racing in it, and he just looks exhausted, and he's like wiping the shit off his face, and like you think he's gonna die.
He can barely see anything. Yeah,
you think he's gonna die. And then like later you find out a little bit more about Le Mans, and you're like, oh, like now I understand why he was so tired, because that was probably like hour 23 of the race, and like, oh my gosh, I can't believe anyone would actually even do that. Like that part is great. And
also Henry Ford cried after like 30 seconds of going at that speed, basically. So
right.
You have all the puzzle.
So that part, those elements I think are good, but I do think that like I do continue to believe that the movie did a poor job of like setting up the problem solving components of
maybe that aspect, but the movie certainly like it's spent an entire other movie starring John Bernthal where he goes to Ferrari and has like a very extended scene about like what they're trying to do and like why that doesn't work, and then that leads up to the whole decision. Like there's a lot that happens in this movie even before Ford decides to go v Ferrari, which I think is kind of funny. So I don't know, I see a lot of the setup there.
Yeah, I mean, now that you bring it up, it's like that's another thing is like I fundamentally just didn't believe this movie needed to be 2.5 hours. Like you could have done the entire Ferrari stuff in like not voiceover, but like some other way, because it's just like that is just completely irrelevant in my opinion. I guess maybe you need the Ferrari stuff so that when that final moment happens between them, it's more meaningful. But like I don't know, they're so poorly sketched out in general that it's like I don't know that the first hour of the movie with Lee Iacocca really like helped that. In my opinion.
Think there's a lot visually that we didn't really talk about, because you go to like. You look at the difference between like Ford's factory, which is very efficient, and you got an assembly line, you got people quickly slapping cars together, and then you travel to the sleek elegance of the Ferrari factory, where it's like, oh yeah, one guy is just going to build each part, and they're going to build it until it's done, and that's it, because that's art. That's how you create a beautiful machine, and it's a very different view. Instead of being the efficiency optimization of America and just trying to do things and dumping money into things, the Ferrari vision was just like, let an artist be an artist, let somebody who's good at making an engine make this engine, and then at the end we will have something that is not just a commodity. It's not just a Ford car. It is a work of art. It's a work of art as a machine. There's more we could talk about this movie. I'm glad that you guys are still thinking about it, because I think there is certainly more going on with it. Like I don't think it's not just a standard biopic. It doesn't have the walk hard problem. It doesn't have the what is his childhood situation. What did he love driving cars as a kid? There's no early scene of him in like a boxcar like leading up to like it's just the situation.
It's not a musical biopic, you know what I mean? But it's like one of these. There's biopics that like focus intensely on a very short period of a person's life, and there's biopics that like try to be really expansive and like are like, here's for this person from birth to death, basically.
Sure.
And I think this movie, unfortunately, is somewhere in between. Like, I don't think it does a particularly good job of like of emphasizing the key aspects that would make this particular moment of these characters' lives like that meaningful. And I don't, well, actually, let me just say that I really, in general, don't like that second form of biopic, like, at all. Which is like, we're going to summarize this whole person's life in a 90-minute film. Like, I kind of really don't like that kind of movie. So I would say it actually does a far better job of getting towards the other kind, where you're focusing intensely on a short period. But I think it nonetheless still is too surface level in some ways to be satisfying for me personally.
Yeah, I see that. To me, I see it is purely one of those movies that focuses intensely because it is all about the relationship between these two guys and this situation with Ford and them just trying to accomplish this thing. It's one thing, and the only bit of like expansiveness we get at the end is that, oh, also after he won the race, this thing like killed him. Like the movie doesn't really look beyond this framing of the Ford and Ferrari battle.
So I'll just say one other thing. Ryan Ferguson writes into Slash Filmcast. He says, "I am fortunate." Here we go. Let's see. I'm going to try to not read this entire email, but to read a small part of the email. So he's talking about here the end of the movie. He says, to me, the movie is incredibly relatable. I 100% agree with Devindra that the Ford company comes off as the antagonist, both in the form of the Deuce, a.k.a. Tracy Letts, and Leo Beebe, Josh Lucas. That magic of the movie is watching two guys try to do something original within a system that is designed to thwart originality at every turn. Towards the end of the podcast, Jeff said it was baffling that audiences were digging the movie so much, but I think it makes a ton of sense. Lots of people work in big bureaucratic systems that can, even during good times, punish you for original creative thinking. What this movie is saying, though, is that even within those systems with everything stacked against you, you can still do something great. You might not get acclaim, you might not get trophies, but you can do the thing, and the doing of the thing is worth it. Hard work is its own reward. Anyway, really enjoyed the film. I don't think it's perfect by any stretch. John Bernthal's character is basically worthless to the plot, and the last 10 or so minutes didn't work for me, but I was fascinated by the drama that played out between Shelby Miles and the Ford Company. You guys rock, keep being awesome. End quote. So, anyway, I'm just saying, all I'm trying to say, Devindra, is conversation last week and then the flood of emails and tweets have pulled me slightly more towards your direction. That's the purpose of me having this After Dark with you is to say
the flood of comments.
I'm pulled slightly more in your direction. I still think the movie has a lot of problems, but I do kind of recognize now what a lot of people saw in it, and I do think the one thing I was way off base on was this idea of like that Ford is in many ways the antagonist, even though the movie might be a little bit more ambiguous in how it sets that up, in my opinion. If you look less at how the filmmaking occurs and more at what the actual story of the movie is, Ford is clearly the antagonist. But that's my position, and a lot of people probably disagree. All right. Shall we wrap it up there?
I'm good. Yeah.
All right. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. Thanks for listening.